Thank you, Agatha. So my name's Ralph Hogan. I'm Wetlands Advisor with the Landscape Finance Lab. And so Dietrich, Sabrina, could we get it? Yeah. So I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of what we've been doing, because I think the most interesting part is going to be the case studies that come later. But just for some background, this is the Waterlands project. I think we'll share this slide deck later so you can get more details on the project, but it's Horizon 2020 related to the Green Deal. Large project over 5 years, includes actual restoration on the ground, as well as looking at indicators, co-creation, engagement of local communities, etc. And the lab has been involved in work package 4, which is around finance. So basically, we've got within the project there are 6 action sites that are listed here, and they're the pink dots on the map, if you can see them. And so we've been working as a lab to try and basically support each of those sites to see what kind of alternative finance that they can bring in. So next slide, please. So yeah, this is what the work package is about. So overall, we want to develop and test mechanisms for sustainable finance. So that's involved sort of looking at what the potential is in each of the action sites, then trying to design and test different instruments. And then we haven't got there yet, but I guess this is part of the legacy work to basically try and inform scaling up financing at a European level. So that's something we're going to put our minds to, I think, over the next 12 months or to the next couple of years towards the end of the project. So the next slide, please. Just basically wanted to first stress, which I guess is very important when we're talking about sustainable finance or alternative to grants, is that it really depends on what we're talking about, what kind of site. And the 6 sites we have is a very big diversity. So firstly, as you can imagine, in types of habitat, we need several peatland sites, but also a large estuary, the Ems-Dollard, Netherlands, Germany border, coastal lagoon in Venice, Karst Marsh in Bulgaria. And some of these sites have huge diversity of scale. So, small site, I think, was around 500 hectares, and leading up to, the Great North Bog that Paul will talk about later, which covers something like 7,000 square kilometers across the north of England. And also then, basically depending on the scale, we very different approaches to the partnerships that are working at each site. So I think every site is working, kind of multi-stakeholder, mostly government and NGOs. But depending on the scale, that can be very different. So, for example, in the Great North Bog, there's actually 6 individual landscapes that make up the Great North Bog, which poses a set of challenges, let's say, for coordinating across the region, while other sites that are much smaller will have more contained, focused partnerships that are maybe much more local. Also, the scope, as I've been saying, some sites are very much focused on one site, whereas others are very much looking at a broader landscape focus, which includes trying to understand the benefits, let's say, what's bigger than the sum of the parts. When you start working at a landscape level, what are the additional benefits that can be derived from ecosystem services that go beyond what comes out of an individual site? Ownership, again, diversity of ownership, as you can imagine, private lands, also different types of public land, be they protected areas, forestry, common grazing, etc. And even touching on transboundary in the Ems-Dollard, though mostly working on the Dutch side, but it's a big part of a bigger transboundary initiative. And then related to all this diversity, then there's, I guess, each site has already got some funding and was already operational before the project started. But there's also a big fair amount of diversity, but some had extensive grants, large into 3-figure numbers, grants for public funding. Others were very much dependent, again, smaller scale on sort of NGO support, maybe some sponsorship from corporates. So also in terms of finance, starting from a very different place. But I think by and large, most were fairly grant focused, but not all, as you'll hear later, or let's say public sector focused. So next slide, please. So this is just to mention a kind of an aside, and this is maybe related to the legacy, Agatha. We've developed this Peatlands Finance Collective under the Waterlands project, but involving a whole lot of other partners. It's focused on the British Isles, so UK and Republic of Ireland, and looking at peatland landscape restoration. So that means we've had interaction with a big initiative in the Republic of Ireland, so Peatland Finance Ireland, which is looking at the whole country and restoration and trying to develop financing for it. And then also areas like in the north of Scotland, there's a Flow Country, there's Loch Lomond, and other partnerships that started to come in, like the Southwest Peatland Partnership, the Southwest of England. And based on that interaction and exchange, there's been several meetings. We were able to develop this publication, Investing in Peatlands, which came out at the beginning of this year. So again, as Agatha mentioned earlier, that's looking at different case studies, at what's happening in these different regions, not only in the British Isles, but also in Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, for example. And trying to sort of, I guess, sketch out the potential, make a case for investing to investors in peatlands, and B, also looking at, you know, some of the challenges and some of the solutions that have been put forward. We had a recent meeting in Leeds, and what was quite interesting was that some people remarked that this publication is already a little bit out of date, and we're now starting to work on something new, just because so many of the sites have been progressing so fast over, you know, the last 6 months. So next slide, please. This is just to kind of give you a scope. Again, I don't want to get into detail. I want to leave that to the presentations that are coming, but let's say the diversity of types of finance we've been looking at. So micro contributions, so that's where a business, maybe a restaurant or a hotel, when a customer comes to paying their bill, they have an option to make a contribution, a percentage, or you know, 10 euros or 5 euros that will go to a conservation project. So I guess it's not really a, you know, a bankable project, if you like, but it can be a very important source of income for some sites, and there's a couple of sites in the project in the Borderlands project that are looking at these micro contributions, and we'll hear more about that later. Voluntary markets, obviously very important. So carbon, and certainly the peatland, many of the peatland projects are focusing very much on carbon, especially in the UK. But also biodiversity and water are things that are basically, let's say, markets that are in development. And so we've been working on those. A lot of, you know, it's not easy. And in some cases, like in the UK, the carbon market related to peatland was quite well developed before the Borderlands project. But we've been looking to build on that, and, for example, support work in Ireland around that, but also looking at Finland and Estonia to look at the potential there. Corporate reporting / commitments. I mean, this has been quite interesting. So this is again, not bankable projects, but many companies are interested in reporting the good things they do. And CSRD is the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive under the EU, where companies are now required to report in. So on the work that they're doing on the environment. So many companies are interested to invest in projects or support projects on the basis that they can then put that into their reporting. So that's becoming very interesting, and especially in Ireland, this Peatland Finance Ireland I mentioned earlier, they've developed a standard with sort of 6 ecosystem services that they're just about to launch. And it looks like there's a very large amount of interest coming from companies that are interested in reporting. Not only, but it's a potentially very important source. Cost savings. So there may be a more technical term for this one, but an example of that is the Ems Dollard, where they're looking at reducing the amount of sediment in the water. And there's ports there that are paying a lot of money every year, you know, in the tens of millions, to dredge the ports. And so if the ecosystem service, or basically the work that they're doing on restoration, can help reduce the silt load, those companies and port authorities are interested in contributing on the basis that it reduces their costs of dredging at the end of the day. And there's many other types of examples like that can be useful. Loans / technical assistance. So this is basically related to investment banks. And there's one site where we're looking at them taking on a loan where they've raised a lot of money. There's still a gap. And so they're looking at taking on a loan from an investment bank to bridge the gap. And there we're looking at what legal entity might take on that loan. And also if there may be some technical assistance with that, which is basically, I guess, like a grant coming from an investment bank. And then finally, blended finance. And I'll come back to this a little bit later, but it's very important, I think, across all of the areas that, there's, yes, there are bankable projects or let's say profit-making projects, but very often it needs government support at some level through some kind of, support for the restoration costs or giving some kind of incentives to the private sector. So again, depending on the type of approach we take, there's quite different approaches to that. And then the next, and I think it's my final slide, was just to give you, I guess, an overview of some of the key elements that we see should be in place if you're, if you're a site and you want to start working on our landscape and want to start working on sustainable finance. These are some of the important elements that needs to be considered. So very important to have a clear vision and strategy. So what restoration is envisaged. And related to that, the cost and benefit. So if you do your restoration, how much will it cost? And what's the benefits going to be coming back, both financial and non-financial? Often, as I think probably everyone knows in this call, that can be very challenging to get the right figures. But it is very important, at the start to be able to develop those figures or those estimations that can then be used to bring in, private sector or public sector, different types of funding. Measuring change, very important, obviously, indicators, metrics, in many cases, standards related to, let's say, the voluntary market, very important. In some cases, those need to be developed. But the private sector is very much focused on, well, how are you measuring? Is there a credible way to actually measure the change that they're going to be looking for from their contribution or from their investment? And then I guess the bankable projects. So really trying to identify then, in your site or in your landscape, are there actually projects that can make a profit or can make a return for an investor? And in many sites there aren't. And so I think, but it's still a matter of, going through and checking that and trying to understand that. And sometimes if there are, as I mentioned earlier, there may be a need for additional public support of some kind to actually make them viable. Pitching is an area we've been working on. So actually then once you kind of, I'd say, have all this information that you can go out and communicate effectively to different audiences, be they, maybe corporates that are interested in reporting or interested in investing their money and getting a return, whatever it might be, but that you can communicate effectively and you can sort of pitch out and sort of say, well, okay, if you invest X, you'll get Y in return, or maybe communicating different levels of investment that they can invest in and the different returns that they might get for that. And it could be, a CSR benefit or a reporting benefit. It doesn't have to necessarily be financial. And then finally, just to note again that the governance is really important. As we work with the different sites, we're seeing that there are potentially regulatory barriers or more needs to be done to engage public sector or government stakeholders to enable some of these sustainable financing mechanisms. So that, or to continue their engagement, for example, in supporting restoration with grants, which may effectively make projects interesting for the private sector. So that's just to kind of give you a bit of an overview, a bit of a flavor. It's been a bit generic because I didn't want to get into too much detail and take the thunder from the presentations that are coming now. But thank you very much, and I'll hand over to
me.
Next, yeah.
So thanks, Rolf. And our next speaker is Paul Liedpieter. I hope I pronounce it well. From Great North. So he will take us to the north of England.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. I'm hoping you can see. Can you see that?
Yeah, that way.
It's coming.
It's coming up. Okay, great. So almost my last name. Lead. Lead is in metal, bitter is in beer, is how I explain to people. I have for the past many years that I've been living in the UK. So I work for I work for the North Pennines National Landscape, and we are part of the Great North Bog Coalition. So what I'm going to try and do in 7 minutes is explain something that's taken 20 years to develop. So I'm the peatland program manager here, and I've been in that role for the past 18 years. And I'm just going to go through where we are in terms of green finance, blended finance, and the things that we do at the North Pennines National Landscape as part of the Great North Bog Coalition. That picture you see is looking down from a UAV on a restored blanket bog site. So we specialize in upland bogs, blanket bogs that are heavily damaged. And we have restored 50,000 hectares in my organization since I started this job. And across the Great North Bog, a much larger amount, which I'll get into. So first thing to say is without doing that, all we're doing is talking about these things. So it's very, very important that we deliver on the ground, obviously. So this has come about, really. We were part of a life project called Pennine Peat Life, which ran 2017 to 23. And when Brexit happened, we were concerned about accessing large-scale finance because the kind of work we do is anywhere from £1 to £3 million a year. And to get that kind of money, there aren't that many pots of money with that deep pocket. So we were concerned about how we do that post-Brexit. And after a beer at a pub, honestly, the idea came up. We had a map, we drew some lines. Somebody said the words Great North Bog, and here we are 6 or 7 years later with a thing. So really, it was out of necessity that we came here. We also knew that the green finance was coming down the pipeline, and we had to be ready. My view is, and organizationally, we feel if the conservation community isn't ready to accept this challenge, then perhaps we're not going to be in a position to dictate or at least influence how this is going to work. So the Great North Bog is an idea, really, of the 6 big peat partnerships in Northern England, ranging from the Peak District, which is, say, the middle of England, West Midlands, all the way north to the Scottish border. And it covers those protected areas. It's 7,000 square kilometers of upland, which I believe is 92% of all of England's upland bog. And it's a massive opportunity. What we found is that corporates like big, government like big, and let's be fair, if you want to get into that world of international kind of or national financing, you have to have a big idea because they want to operate hundreds of millions rather than hundreds of thousands. So worth pointing out that the 3 North Pennines National Landscape, Yorkshire Peat Partnership, and Moors for the Future were all LIFE projects. So LIFE, this is a part of the success of the LIFE program. I presented last week to Sylvia Barova's team, last month to Sylvia Barova's team to present this. So this is a success. The afterlife plan is the Great North Bog for our organization. So it's a real success of EU funding. So really, it's just an idea. We were cooperating anyway, but now we cooperate much more effectively, and we have structures in place to ensure that kind of ongoing work. So the activities over the past few years is a governance is now in place. Rolf talked about that. Having 6 different organizations made up of national parks, wildlife trusts, so NGOs, and me, with the North Pennines National Landscape, but I'm coming to you from Durham right now in an office at Durham County Council. So officially, I'm a local authority. I'm a government employee. We're independently funded, but legally, we're a government organization. So how do you get these 6 organizations working together? We have different views of the world, slightly different views of the world. So governance is in place now. We have a board, we have operations group, we have a partnership group. Very important to do that. We have a strategy that was developed in the first years of the project. We have a website outlining our common vision of where we want to go with this, which is essentially going out to the market and saying, we have this big thing called the Great North Bog. If you want to work with us to finance it through carbon credits, please express an interest. And we went out to the investment world in the UK, and some EU people applied too. And they applied to be part of the Great North Bog financing machine. So we did that in 2003. We completed it earlier this year. We received 15 expressions of interest from the private sector, which is really big companies, banks you will know, organizations, big international companies you will know. And we basically went through a due diligence process, which was essentially where we would and wouldn't take money from, and had in-depth discussions with these corporates. It was an iterative approach, and we treated it like an interview process, like for a job. And it seemed to work because we don't know the answers. They didn't know the answers. It's very much a honest discussion about, in this case, carbon credits and the role of peatlands in climate change, flood mitigation, that kind of thing. And we learned a lot. It was a really inspiring and eye-opening conversation that we had over a year with these corporates. We now have 4 of them signed up, so to speak, and I'm going to York on Friday or Thursday to sign up the next one. So it's all happening. This is live. It is actually occurring rather than something we want to do. There's a lot to learn and there's a lot to share, and we're going to be developing case studies to share. We will share that with everybody who wants to see it. Where we are now is we need to decide on a special purpose vehicle. The Great North Bog isn't an organization, it's 6 separate entities. So we have to be a thing. We have to be a company, a charity. That's being advised. We are being advised on through the help of the Landscape Finance Lab. So part of this Waterlands project. It's been immensely helpful having very clever people from the lab outside of our organizations talk to us about this. We are promoting a new strategy, a Great North Bog strategy and manifesto, which is something we've done for the election that's just happened in the UK. So continuing to have peatlands on the agenda. We are producing case studies with the Green Finance Institute. So they are picking our brains, and we'll have a series of case studies to share, as I've mentioned. Working to solve some of the barriers. So while this sounds all great, it's taken a long time to get here, but the carbon market is still not working as it needs to. We're looking to develop the CSR markets as well. Don't just focus on credits. CSR money is still there as ESG. I mean, we can debate what the differences are between those two monies, but it's still money that has less strings attached or different strings. We also developed donation models. I think Rolf talked about this a bit. We are currently working with a company that we get about £60,000 a year from donations. So that's nothing to sneeze at. If I had 10 of those, which would be reasonably possible to do, that's £600,000 a year. That's staff costs, that's match funding. So don't forget about that. Look at other financial instruments. Again, working with the lab, we are looking to develop perhaps an idea for a bond. Can we tap into the bond market? What does that mean? How might it work? That kind of thing. We also collaboratively submit very large bids to the government and other funders. So we currently have, through one of our funders, Esme Fairbairn in the UK, a £2.6 million project which pays for staff time across the Great North Bog. And what they like is bigger, better, more connected. We also are developing the restoration pipeline. Without that first picture of us doing stuff, we're just talking about peatland restoration. So we have a very active pipeline. It's the most important thing we do, actually, getting sites surveyed. So without that product, as it were, you're doing nothing really. So we have to be able to continue the work, which is what we do every year. Last year, the Great North Bog restored about 20,000 hectares of peat in Northern England. So we continue to do that. This year, a similar amount. Restoration season is now, and it's happening as we speak, literally as we speak. So keeping up the momentum and scaling up, we are being encouraged to do that by the government, and corporates also want that. Things to consider, this is my last slide. The carbon market is new, it's nascent, it's not fully developed yet. You may have examples in your area of it, going swimmingly, but it's not in the UK yet. It's the voluntary market is not where it needs to be, mainly because the price of carbon is too low. Why sell your carbon for £20 a ton where you heard a rumor somewhere it's going to be £60 in 2 years? There's an issue there that we're trying to deal with DEFRA and the powers that be. Corporates want to invest, and it's in quotes because invest means many things. Sometimes corporates want to give you money to help support for CSR reasons, or they want a return on it, or they want to buy carbon credits to offset, or we actually have some corporates that have a blend of this. They are putting some money in, doing restoration work so they can have first crack any carbon credits that come up. So there's another type of money, I think, a blended blend perhaps. We need to be at the table to write the rules. If we're not, the rules will be written for us. And I do think the conservation sector has to meet this challenge. Don't just focus on carbon credits or any kind of credits. CSR and ESG is still available. We got £1 million last year for CSR reasons, essentially, so it's still there. This is one, there's a lack of bundling and stacking capacity. It's very confusing right now. There's too many new products on the market, and what's happening, it creates a paralysis of decision by the landowner. Oh, I'll just wait till next year because I heard so-and-so's got a biodiversity stacking bundling thing coming down the line. And it's such a new market that creates, it slows things down, let's say. I would argue, think big, think connected, get your offer defined. You have to know what you're offering. If it's kind of, well, we're not sure, what do you think? Get your offer, whether it's peat restoration or pollination or flooding, whatever it is, get a menu. I think that's really helpful, and it seems to be what corporates want. There's still an evolving consensus on the ethics of all this. I still hear, as recently as our Durham meeting with Eurosite last week, the idea about bastardizing nature or monetizing it, however you want to put it. That's more of a discuss thing. The source of the money is important. Where that money comes from. Are there sectors you won't take money from? I'm sure you have your own personal opinions, but have the discussion. It's really important. And then beware of the race to the bottom. If you are privatizing, if you're profitizing and privatizing nature credits, you might find you can make more money by doing a cheaper job. We need to make sure that the restoration work in peatlands and especially gets done to the level that the conservation community would do it at. And that's our challenge. And we're seeing this already at the race to the bottom. And then peat can lead the way. I'm a peat guy, but I'm very conscious that I want to help, other ecosystems really and develop. So peat can help that, I think. And there we go. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. Very impressive. Thanks for all this information. The next speaker will also talk about blanket bogs and will take us to Ireland. So, Guadagnette, can I ask you to share?
Yep, so let me know when you can see the screen, please.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. And I'm going to be speaking today about resource-based payment and how this is helping to improve peatland habitats in Ireland, and how we're using that in the Irish action side indeed to improve the payments in terms of habitat quality, and how this finance model can be actually scaled up at national scale. So what resource-based payment are? Pretty sure many of you are familiar with this already. But basically, the approach here is very simple. So we pay the farmers, or in this case, the stakeholders, or well, in this case, the shareholders, based on the habitat quality. So better is habitat quality, better is the payment. So for example, if we go a land that is really degraded, in this case, a blanket bog, then the farmer in this case get a very low payment, but also the farmer can see a pathway to actually improve that score by implementing some initiative that actually allows the farmer to get a higher score and in the future a higher payment as well, because he's improving the habitat quality. So the tool that we use for this is the scorecards. So the scorecards in this case actually is the ECRAS. I know Caroline is around here as well, so she probably could answer some of the questions as well today. But the tool that we use is the ECRAS scorecards. Are based in 3 sections: ecological integrity, hydrological integrity, and threats and future prospects. And these include all the factors that we assess in order to define the habitat quality. So for example, in ecological integrity, we look at the species that you have on the bog, good indicators. For example, if you go cotton grasses, pan mosses, good indicators, you get a higher score. In the case of hydrological integrity, we're looking at artificial drainage, for example, whether it's present or not on the land. And in terms of threats and future prospects, we're looking at degradation activities that happens on the peatland, for example, peat cutting or invasive species. So today I'm going to focus on 3 elements just to give you some examples on how restoration actions can improve these scores and therefore improve the payments. And I'm going to focus on the non-native species in Ireland, target activity, and bare soil. And here is the 3 questions that we're going to be covering. And again, you can see different scores, negative scores, positive scores, and all of that will depend on the extent of these activities and also in how we can improve them. So here we go 2 examples of a farm. So one with high quality land and low quality land. So obviously you probably can see already some factors there that actually are making this farm low and high quality. But to give you some idea on what we look at is positive indicators in the case of high quality, natural wet features. So if you got some pool systems and so on, usually that is a good indication in terms of high quality habitat. We're also looking at no artificial drainage on the land, and certainly no active peat cutting in this case for a high quality farm. When we're looking at the low quality, obviously we're looking at the invasive species. So if you see the graphic, you can see some conifers plantations on the left, but also you can see some pink flowers there, which is rhodo, which is a very important problem in the west of Ireland. Also burning activities, actually in the case of the Irish action side, this is not a problem at the moment, but we are aware this is a problem across blanket bogs in the UK. Artificial drainage, as you can see, 2 big drains on the land that is draining the bog and therefore affecting the hydrological integrity, but also peat cutting activities that you can see on the right as well is an indication of low quality land. So how these activities impact the scores? Just give you some examples. So the first scenario that I'm going to look at is turf cutting or peat cutting if you are in outside Ireland. And again, in this case, for example, we can see here something very unusual nowadays, a person cutting the pit. So usually nowadays it's a machine doing that, which is more damaging activity. But again, if you go active tap cutting on your land, this means you're gonna lose 30 points in your score, and this is affecting the payment indeed. However, if you stop to do the tough cutting on the year 2, you can see already an improvement of 40 points on here. So actually, what we're doing here is by just stopping the activity, the farmer can get 40 increase on the score, and that's very, very huge improvement on the land and certainly on the score. However, obviously you can observe that the turf bank is still there, therefore the hydrology and the vegetation maybe not recover straight away. It may take a long time actually before you recover this, and you can see on the photo the long term there and how it looks like. So what we're doing, for example, in waterlands is offering the farmers as well activity which is called reprofiling, and then we have a pot of money to help them and pay them to do this activity, which also goes to the same conclusion of the 40 points, but also will improve the hydrology and revegetate the area in a shorter time, and we don't need to wait that long time for this activity. So the scenario 2 that we have here, this is the easiest one, invasive species. So basically we got 2 questions on the scorecard in relation with that. So if you have present of these invasive species, it could be rhodo, it could be conifers or any other invasive species on the peatland, you're losing 10 points straight away. So that is very important for farmers because it's also very easy to address. But also we look at the density of these invasive species. So it's not the same when you have a low abundance or when you have a high abundance in the land, you know. So the farmer can actually lose 30 points here if they have the species, the invasive species on the land, and it's a high density of them. And that's how it look like in year 1. So what we can do with waterland actually is remove these non-native species, and the farmer straight away goes to abstain, and therefore is not losing the 10 points anymore. So but also what we can do is remove all of them. So you can go from high density to low density, and I will show you some examples in the end of the presentation. And again, the farmer is gaining 20 points here. So in total, the farmer can gain 30 points just by removing the conifers. And this can be done very, very quickly. So we have 2 restoration plans at the moment that we have complete within a week. We only need a farmer with the cutting machine and cutting the trees straight away. In this case, the conifers, and improve the score is very, very quickly in this case. Another aspect I want to cover is and that's the last one, is the bare soil, a very, very typical scenario in the UK and in Ireland. And again, the farmers are losing 20 points here just on the year 1. Obviously, we can do restoration actions on here and use the style and so on, but still the farmer will lose the 20 points because we'll not have vegetation yet. So this takes a bit longer to recover. And that is where I can see improvement on the long term. So obviously the farmer can gain 10 points in the long term. But again, is any room there on the scorecards to actually add this restoration stage that will encourage the farmer to do this. And here very quickly 3 examples of what we're speaking about. So these are the Architulian upper, where we have an increase of 20 points already because the farmer had cut over 200 conifers that have been self-seed from a plantation. And here we got another 2 examples of recovering of erosion control. I said that in year 2 you will not see the vegetation grow, but actually what you can see here is after 8 months. So actually has seen a huge recovery on bare pit areas where we have low density of grazing and so on. Therefore, perhaps we can actually improve this score a lot quicker than we thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we will change type of ecosystem, and we will go to Italy. So Jane, please share your case study with us.
To introduce the fact why I called my presentation Beyond Tourism, because when people think of Venice, they think of problems like over-tourism and flooding, rather than remembering and noting Venice for what it truly is, which is a World Heritage Site, selected as a World Heritage Site, Venice and the lagoon. Next slide. So what we have to remember is that rather than thinking of too much of the problems of Venice, Venice is part of this enormous one, the largest coastal wetland in Italy, one of the most important coastal wetlands in the Mediterranean for biodiversity, most specifically because that's what they choose to measure for the bird populations, both number of species and individuals that belong to the lagoon. And our work as an NGO has been to take attention away from the problems of Venice to look at the opportunities that the Venice Lagoon brings, if we go to the next slide, for livelihoods and for the values to society. And this is what I'm talking about. These are people working out on our Waterlands Action site, where we realize that the lagoon can provide alternative jobs, different kinds of productive activities beyond exchange. There's the values to society and the protection that a more resilient lagoon system, which means more wetlands, more salt marsh, can offer for the benefit of Venice. The next slide. So working together through the Waterlands Initiative and with input very much appreciated from the Landscape Finance Lab, we've been trying to articulate what kinds of practical actions need to be done to work on expanding the salt marsh in the lagoon and showing the values to society that this will bring. So from this slide shows like what we do and how we can work together with businesses in order to do this more. So our work is includes the scientific research and innovation, as well as which contributes not just to understanding how to design and build better reconstructed wetlands, but also the monitoring needs and the monitoring solutions to produce the tools necessary for an adaptive management scenario for the lagoon. And on the company side, there's very various advantages. Some of those outlined in Paul Leadbeater's presentation that can attract contributions from companies as corporate social responsibility. We can work with, if we go to the next slide. We can also work with so this shows the activities that are funded, and sorry, the next one. The next slide. Yeah, so by working with companies, they can either fund the work that we do through their corporate social responsibility, or with local businesses that may or may not be involved specifically in tourism. We can also introduce, we're also working on a micro contribution scheme so that the visitors to Venice or the productive activities in Venice can be counterbalanced by work to restore and regenerate the lagoon. Next slide. So we're taking the work that we're doing through the Waterlands Initiative, which comes as, 100% grant for the work that we're doing. And we've set up an initiative called VITAL, which stands for Venice Natural Capital. And that will be the legacy of the grant funded foundations of the initiative to then accept different types of funding that have already started to come from local businesses, and we hope in the future more international businesses to reverse the trend which makes Venice look like it's imminently vulnerable, and also compensate importantly for the very for limited and also very discontinuous public funding. What's important to note, for maybe others of you who are watching this are in the same situation, that the areas to be restored is common. It's common ground. It's not, nobody owns the lagoon except the state. So our proposition depends very much on a public-private partnership type structure, whereby the private funding can help us influence the public authorities more to ensure that they do responsible wetland restoration and ensure that they have the tools and the monitoring results that they need to be able to do that. We are working very much on, no, you can go to that last slide, which is yeah, I thought of ending on this slide that, you know, we're talking about going beyond tourism to look at the value of nature regeneration in its own right as a development model for the Venetian territory. But in turn, this will also nourish a different way of enjoying Venice. Thank you, and I'm really sorry about my internet connection.
Thank you, Jane. Don't worry, we all have this problem sometimes. So that was our case study from Italy, and the last one will be from Germany. And I think Jan Peters is already here with us, so he will. Yes, I see you now. Please, if you can share your slides and just start. Sorry.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually not joining from Germany, but from Estonia, because we just have a workshop here in our Estonian action sites from Waterlands on policies. And I just quickly went out to give this presentation on paludiculture. So we are moving back to peatlands, and I want to talk a bit about green business models for peatlands. You have probably heard that in the other presentations on peatlands before, that we have a huge problem with drained peatlands, especially under agriculture. We have huge emissions, we have loss of biodiversity, we have water issues. So we know that the future of peatland agriculture will have to move from drained peatlands to paludiculture, where and to ecological restoration, which we have heard, but also to paludiculture, where we still have a usage of these lands for the farmers, for the land users. What is paludiculture? So rewetting can actually, and restoration can actually be combined with agriculture and forestry. And paludiculture is this productive use of wet peatlands. It comes from the Latin word swamp, peatland, palus, and the aims are to remain the production on these lands as large scale, especially in Central, but also Western Europe, are drained actually for these causes, and to preserve the peat body to enable a long-term use of these areas, to not losing these productive soils. And paludiculture actually has a wide range of products and value chains. Here you see some graphs from the Peatland Atlas, which we published last year. So there are in different sectors with different crops, especially in the construction sector, there are a lot of applications for paludiculture. But now the question is, why don't you see that when you go to your construction shop to the market? Because the challenge lies in the development of the value chains, and there we have kind of a lock-in effect, a chicken egg issue, that on the one hand agriculture is not rewetting, not restoring their peatlands because they don't see a market for the biomass from paludiculture, from the wet use, and on the other hand the economy, which at the moment is quite often not aware of this issue, and it's not in their mind, but actually they would have an interest to invest more, because we also see that wood fibers, for example, are getting scarcer on the market, getting more expensive, and they are actually looking for new innovative materials from sustainable sources. So we have to close the cycle and break this lock-in effect. So that's why we founded the Tomorrow Initiative. It's a game of words in German, and it's mostly at the moment German focused initiative between Environmental Foundation of Michael Otto and Michael Zucker Foundation, partner in the Greifswald Meyer Center. And the main targets are actually to bring ecology, politics, and economy together, and involve like different stakeholders there. It also had been awarded as one of the top 10 projects in Germany for supporting the UN Decade for Ecological Restoration. And what are we doing there? We are actually working quite a lot with companies, also with larger companies here in Germany. And in the next 2 years, we will focus on a Paludi Alliance. So there are 14 major companies from Germany, from Austria, but also internationally ones like Procter & Gamble, as you can see here, working on product development, and then afterwards on scaling up. And at the moment, we work on 2 value chains. One is for paper and packaging, and where we have, on the one hand, the paper and packaging producers, but on the other hand, also the companies who are using the package then for their e-commerce, online shops, and logistics. And on the other hand, we have the partners for construction and insulation material, where we have, for example, Strabag, which is Europe's biggest construction company, or Sto, who is very much involved in materials like I think it's the world market leader in insulation materials. So we really have like strong partners there. And how do we work? Now we are in the first step. Actually, we are collaborating. So these companies talk to each other, and we bring in scientific knowledge. We bring in technical knowledge there. They are collaborating and they are piloting. So they are testing, they learn, they optimize, and then they will decide if they stop, or, and that will hopefully be the case in at least some of the applications, scaling up together with other partners, so that we can then multiply it within the whole industry. And we are also looking on expansion to other sectors, to other companies, to other network partners, so that in future, like also other applications of paludiculture business cases could be applied. The thing is that we, of course, need biomass for that, and we are also working on that. Actually, we have now in Germany established 9 large-scale paludiculture projects, which are distributed over the peatland-rich regions of Germany, mostly in the north, but also one in the south, in Bavaria. And they are all connected with this Paludi Netz, the Paludi network, so that we are not inventing the wheel everywhere at the same time, but really exchange the knowledge. And also the good thing is that these projects are supported actually by 2 ministries. So the Ministry for Environment and Nature and the Ministry of Agriculture. They work very closely together and fund these projects, and also see the big potential to scale it up. And they have different approaches. There are some projects working on wet meadows, so mowing the meadows and use it for hay, and that could be used then for paper packaging, for example, or water buffaloes like livestock. and others working on paludi crops like reed, cattail, or even sphagnum farming to use it as horticultural substrate. And how does it look like? Just to give you an impression, this is a fen paludiculture site in northeastern Germany where cattail is grown. The issue always is, of course, that at the moment we have wet islands in the drained landscape, which makes water management difficult. But of course, we are working towards scaling up so that we also could like improve the hydrological work. And this cattail, these products, this biomass can be used for construction materials, for packaging as well, for these like trays made from paludiculture. We also have a whole tiny house, which is like made for demonstration out of all kinds of different paludiculture materials. So to show people how it could be used. And the other one example is sphagnum farming as a bog paludiculture, more northwestern Germany, closer to the North Sea, where we grow on 20 hectares now sphagnum, and also test a lot with new machinery. Like here you can see a remote controlled robot which is mowing and harvesting the sphagnum to reduce actually the pressure, the ground pressure, to not disturb the peat and the sphagnum there. So a lot of things going on, and that is already used now because we are collaborating also very closely with a growing media company. This is used for this Kaluna, for example, which you see on the below picture, that is grown on harvested sphagnum moss from this site, and it's already sold on the market because it has proved actually as similar good as peat. Of course, at the moment it's still more expensive, but it comes with a lot of environmental benefits. And we think that if we convince the companies, but also the customers to pay a slightly higher price, it will also have a good chance on the market. So we are sure that we can only achieve many SDGs worldwide with farming on wet peatlands, and because it has a lot of benefits, it solves a lot of issues, and it can also convince farmers and landowners and also the private sector to get involved into peatland restoration. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. So now we can start with a Q&A session. Rolf, would you take over?
Sure. Yeah, perfect. No, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Jan. Thanks, everybody. So let's, any questions, folks can type them into the chat, or if anyone, there's so many participants, it will be difficult to see someone raising a hand, but you can try that. We're just opening up for any burning questions coming in orally from people. If not, I'll start off with some that are here in the chat. Okay, so I'll go to the chat. So Perrine Genot, Perrine Vincent from Hummingbirds has asked about the CRFC methodology. Is anyone working with that on peatlands? So Jan, Gwendolyn, Paul, CRFC, are you guys interacting with that? And it's still in development, right? Maybe Jan, I'll put that question to you. Is that something on your radar?
Yeah, it's on our radar. And we actually talking a lot with the companies because they are actually the ones who have to implement it at the end. And there are still quite some open questions, but yeah, it's definitely on the radar.
Okay. But it's still in development, right? It's still, yeah. Another question from Tim Parfit. How much does a peat moss sell for in horticulture? If it's more, just to understand if it's more than, I mean, you mentioned it was more than alternatives, but what's the price difference?
To be honest, I can't answer this question because I'm not the full expert in sphagnum farming, but I can take that question with me and ask my colleagues for this. I don't have the numbers in mind.
Okay.
What was the question, Rolf, on that?
So is it right that the cost of whatever, I guess, sphagnum replacing peat moss? What's the price
Right,
difference?
so we plant several 100,000 sphagnum plants a year, and the current price is about a pound of plants is what we buy them for restoration purposes. So it's a massive market. I mean, there's only one provider in all the UK, and they struggle to meet the demand. So it's about a pound a plant in England, in the UK.
And if you're and as a whatever substrate substitute for peat moss, have you any idea how much it retails for? Or
No, I think that's an undiscovered country, I think. I mean, because a lot of companies are trying to grow sphagnum to be a replacement for peat as a substrate. So I don't think that's clear. I mean, others might know, but I'm not sure about that. It feels like a very new market right now.
thanks.
Yeah, it's really a new market, but maybe one thing which I haven't mentioned, that there's not only these public funded projects, but there's also now a startup which is called Zukunft Moor, and they are actually in northwestern Germany now implementing a new, like, just private investment site for sphagnum farming, and they already have like contracts, longer term contracts with horticultural growing media producers, and it seems to be on a price level that it's actually attractive to make up a business case from it. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Thanks, Sean. One more question for you, and then I'll go search for questions for other people. But Craig Bullock has asked about polyculture and biodiversity. So is it possible to, I guess, to maximize biodiversity gains from what looks like a kind of a monoculture situation?
Yeah, we are working quite a lot on that, especially University of Greifswald is very much engaged, but also with strong collaboration with other universities. And it shows that actually a lot of rare peatland specific species, which are among the most endangered species in our landscapes, because most of the peatlands are gone, that they actually come back to these sites. So we see a lot of dragonfly, a lot of spider species, which are almost extinct in these regions, then actually come back to these paludiculture sites and can be found there. And they don't care that much about if the site is harvested. Also, most of these sites, I didn't told that, are harvested in winter times when they anyway hibernating, or like the birds migrating away. So we see that there are actually a lot of biodiversity benefits, especially when you compare it to the status which was on these sites before, which is like intensive grassland or cropland management, where you don't find any of these species. Yeah? So it's definitely an improvement, and there are a lot of studies. I can also share that if you want.
Sorry, John, follow-on question for me. Is anyone actually looking then at whatever measuring biodiversity uplift or potential biodiversity credits related to polyculture, or is that?
That's also a topic where there are teams looking into that, but this is also very much in the initial phase still.
Okay, thanks.
There is actually what is there already is connecting, and that is what the startup which I just mentioned is actually doing. They're combining carbon credits, so they have use the More Futures methodology from Germany to pay for the investment, for the upfront investment of rewetting and establishing, and then selling the product on the market. So that is already happening, combining carbon credits and paludiculture production.
Oh, interesting. Okay, thanks. Quentin, a question for you. You mentioned that points can be earned via cutting the exotic trees on the wetlands. How do you plan on addressing the critics that it could be seen as deforestation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in this case, invasive species, so actually the farmers have a bad view about them. These plantations that have been done, monocultures, so all just conifers for industry, the farmers don't like that. So the landowners actually want them to go away. So, and the ones that we're cutting is the ones that are actually getting into the peatland, you know, as a consequence of being closed by the plantation. So that's the fair thing. In the case of the Rhodo as well, in the west of Ireland, this has been seen as an invasive species as well. So the farmers don't like them at all. So we don't have that problem. It's a good point. To be honest, I was in a site where we cut a lot of trees last week, and I was a bit like, oh my God, what we're doing. But again, this is invasive trees, so we need to see the benefit of that, and also we keep the native trees anyway. You know, if it's any native trees on the parcel, we keep them, and hopefully by removing these invasive species, we will promote actually the growth as well of normal species, you know, the species that should be there, basically.
Thanks, Gwendolyn. And possibly another question for you. Caroline Sullivan has a question. Caroline, do you want to ask?
I think she's actually...
Thanks, Rolf.
Yeah.
Not a question for Gwadneth. We've been collaborating very well. So this is for Paul. Paul, you outlined the kind of the framework for gaining funding and distributing that funding. I was wondering if you could outline some of the key pitfalls or obstacles that you've faced in developing that, and how you might how you dealt with them.
So do you mean the Great North Bog Coalition, 6 partners, how we managed to, yeah, okay. So when the partners first came together to be the Great North Bog, the first board meeting, as it were, one of the first things we wanted to do was figure this out. And rather than figure it out straight away, we agreed. I was very impressed. We worked with a finance person called Dan Hurd, who is our finance advisor, because my background's in forestry, and most of the people here have backgrounds in ecology and geography and not finance. So the worry was we get stuck in a discussion about what the Great North Bog should be. So all the tough things we parked initially and focused on what we agreed, and went forward with that. And that led us to developing a funding bid to Esme Fairbairn, who saw the power and potential in the Great North Bog coming together. So as we managed to kind of tick some of these issues off, things we agreed, and we progressed some of the discussions, we come to these tougher ones, which due diligence. So if you're a wildlife trust, you're membership driven, you have different due diligence view than perhaps we do as a national landscape, which is perhaps different than a national park. So we slowly just gone through these things and agreed to disagree, or agreed to disagree in a healthy way, and have somebody third party come in and help us resolve that. And the most recent thing has been with the Landscape Finance Lab, where some of Rolf's colleagues have come all online and picked the brains of all of the directors of the Great North Bog Partners and said, what is a Great North Bog in your view? What isn't it? Tell us your worries, tell us your ambitions. And they pulled that together in a way that I thought was very healthy. And so people got to air their concerns about things. And then that, I think, allowed us to have a more focused view on where to go. So the last thing we have to do is really figure out this special purpose vehicle, which will be a company limited by guarantee or a charity, whatever. But in terms of the actual mechanics of it, we have these corporate partners who've agreed to support the Great North Bog if and when carbon projects come through the line. And I say if and when because they don't always. The price of carbon is too low. When they come down, so if a site comes from me in the pipeline that has carbon, we take it to one of these 4, now 5 partners and say, bid on it. So they have this kind of framework where they get the first crack at the carbon based on numbers and certain things. So we have this framework for offering up carbon to be sold too. And one thing to be clear is we don't own any of the land. It's all owned by private landowners. So there's an additional complication, let's say. And us as a national landscape, and I think the other GME partners, always be about getting the best deal for the landowner and for the people that work on the land as well. So it's still a work in progress, but we've just had a very grown up and gradual conversation rather than rush straight into something. So it's been, so far so good. And I feel quite positive about it.